The Forgotten Basement. In the quiet town of Dudley, Massachusetts, there's an old colonial house that locals avoid like a plague. The history books barely mention it, but older residents whisper tales of disappearances, strange noises, and things best left undisturbed. The house had stood vacant for decades until 1997, when a young couple, Emma and Mark Thompson, bought it at an auction, charmed by its low price and rustic appeal. What they didn't know was why it was so cheap. Emma was the first to notice the oddities. The doors would creak open even when tightly shut. At night, she'd hear faint footsteps above their bedroom ceiling, though the attic was empty. "It's an old house," Mark reasoned, creaking wood and settling foundations. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of old documents left by the previous owner, she found a handwritten note buried beneath a stack of yellowed papers. It read, "Do not go into the basement. Whatever you do, stay out." Her curiosity was piqued. The basement door was a heavy, padlocked thing, sealed as if to protect against something inside. She mentioned it to Mark, but he shrugged it off. "We'll get it open eventually," he said. "Let's focus on getting the place livable first." It was 2 months later when the basement forced itself into their lives. Late one night, they woke to a rhythmic thudding sound. It seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement door, Emma trailing reluctantly behind him. To their astonishment, the padlock was gone. The door hung slightly ajar. "That's impossible," Emma whispered, her breath clouding in the frigid air. Mark pushed the door open. A set of narrow wooden stairs descended into pitch blackness. The air that wafted up was damp and stale, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. They stepped inside, the beam of Mark's flashlight cutting through the darkness. At first, it seemed like any other basement, exposed pipes, cobwebs, and stacks of forgotten junk. But then they saw it, a door. Unlike the rest of the basement, this door was pristine, painted bright red, and had no visible handle or hinges. Carved into its surface was a single word: remember. Mark reached out to touch it, but Emma grabbed his arm. "Don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Let's just leave it alone." But Mark was already knocking, his knuckles rapping against the surface. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the space beyond was impossibly vast. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the door. Then it knocked back. The next morning, Mark wasn't himself. He sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his coffee. Emma tried to engage him, but his responses were monosyllabic, distant. That evening, she found him standing in front of the basement door, muttering under his breath. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I have to go back," he said, his tone flat. "It's waiting for me." Emma grabbed his arm, pulling him away, but he shoved her off with a strength that startled her. His eyes, once warm and familiar, now seemed alien. He descended the stairs, disappearing into the darkness before she could stop him. She called the police. 2 officers arrived within the hour, but when they searched the basement, there was no sign of Mark. The red door was gone, replaced by a blank concrete wall. The next few weeks were a blur of missing persons reports, futile searches, and sleepless nights. Emma refused to stay in the house, moving in with her sister. But even miles away, she couldn't escape the nightmares. In her dreams, Mark stood in front of the red door, his face pale and twisted into a grotesque grin. He beckoned to her, whispering words she couldn't understand. Behind him, the door opened, revealing a churning void filled with shadowy figures reaching out for her. One night, Emma woke to find her phone buzzing. It was a text from Mark's number. "Come home." Against her better judgment, she returned to the house. The basement door was wide open, the stairs descending into an abyss of darkness. On the wall above the door, scrawled in what looked like blood, was a single word: remember. Emma hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She called out Mark's name, but only silence answered. Gripping a flashlight, she descended the stairs. She was never seen again. To this day, the house remains vacant. Those brave enough to peek inside claim the basement door is always open, and from its depths, faint whispers echo. A man's voice calling for help and a woman's scream, cut short. Locals swear the house is cursed, but no one dares to demolish it. And every so often, a new note appears on the front door.